So we've done form, we've done class, we've done speed. So now our final part of our elements of handicapping for the Preakness 149 is pace. And we're going to look at three different factors in evaluating each contender in terms of pace. We're going to look at the final fraction, we're going to look at the average pace, and we're going to look at the sustained pace. And the final fraction is represented by 3FR when you look at the pace numbers we're about to set up. And 1FR, 2FR, 3FR. For those of you who don't know, for routes, 1FR is at the half-mile mark. The 2FR is the 6 furlong mark, and that's considered the second pace call. And then the third is the final time. What you see here are the averages for the contenders, and this is represented in feet per second. So this is a way to indicate how fast a horse is going at each call of the race. And then what you do for the average pace, or first you calculate the sustained pace, which is the second and the third call averaged to arrive at that number. Then you take the sustained pace and add it to the second pace call, average that, and that gives you the average pace. So I hope that's clear on how those are calculated. Then we'll finally have our subjective progression in the +2, -2 scale like we've been doing. And we award those based on whether or not we think a horse is going to move forward or regress or just maintain form. So that's how we calculate pace. Now, because we don't have a true front runner in this race, I've added an extra feature to think about, and it's called percentage energy. And what it's designed to do, it's a calculation that you make. You take the second pace call and you divide it by the second and third pace calls added together. And what that gives you is the percentage of energy a horse is using all the way up until the 6 furlong mark in a route. So, and what you get, the percentage tells you how efficiently a horse is running, how much energy he's using early, and consequently how much he would have late. So these are the typical ranges for each type of running style, E, EP, P, and S, as we often use on all our postings. So if you look within the ranges, that'll give you a good idea of who is staying in their lane, if you will, and who is running efficiently based upon their running style. And so I hope that's clear, and we'll get to that later, but I just wanted to add that because it's not overly certain who the front runner in this race is going to be. And so maybe this will give us a clue. So I thought I'd give you a little extra data here to maybe help you if you're trying to figure out what the race shape is. So we'll look at Mugatu first, and we'll use the Bluegrass Stakes. And as we do, we're using the last race each horse is running, with a couple of exceptions, which we'll get to. But the idea is to get their most recent form. And certainly if we can't get a representative race from their most recent form, we want to find one that's fairly current, that indicates potentially how the horse can run when things are a little more favorable, or if all things were equal, let's say. And I think that gives us a really good way to compare the horses. And of course, we augment that by the progression and regression factors throughout in form, class, speed, and pace. So I hope that's clear, and that's why we're trying to do it, is just to get the most all things being equal type of comparison. So we'll look at the Bluegrass, and we'll see that Mugatu, although he's a late runner, his first couple of fractions were pretty quick. He made a big move at the 6 furlong mark, and consequently he flattened out with a 49.94, which is below average. You see that in parentheses there, minus 1.55. You see the average and sustained pace are about average. Average pace is a little bit above average, pardon the pun. The big troubling thing, a couple things, is number one, what those fractions say to me is this is a horse who's trying to keep up and maybe is a little bit outclassed. Number one. And number two, the percentage energy is really high for a horse who's running late. And that, I think, is indicative of a horse trying to keep up in a race that maybe he was a little outclassed in. Can this horse move forward? I think he can. He is indicating that he is moving, likely to move forward, but how much and how well will it be competitive? I don't think the race shape sets up terribly well for him. So I'm giving a +1 to Mugatu, which ends up giving him a positive score. But I kind of have a feeling he's a little outclassed in this regard. So we come to Uncle Heavy. And again, the Wood Memorial presented problems. He was carried wide. Maybe there's been some traffic issues with deposition going down. So what I've decided to do is go back to the Withers Stakes, which is probably his best race to date, and see if it can give us some clues. Because I think Uncle Heavy is probably going to run better in the Preakness. Whether it's good enough, I don't know. But Butch Reed is, when he ships, they usually are running. So we look at the Withers, and again, this is a horse who's a late runner, and yet he has a descending pattern, which is more attuned to a early presser. And you see all the fractions are pretty slow. So that's a big red flag. He did win the race. It was the best race he had run, and yet the fractions were really slow for a horse who's supposed to be closing. Consequently, his average and sustained pace numbers are below average, and he did expend energy at a good percentage. So I think he's running the way a late runner is supposed to, but those fractions are pretty darn alarming. And I think it really indicates how subpar that Withers Stakes was. So, again, horse Wither, I think will move forward, but the race shape and doesn't set up well. And I'm think this horse, kind of like Mugatu, is a bit outclassed with an unfavorable race scenario. So now we look at Catching Freedom, who ran a good fourth in the Derby. We're using the Derby as a reference because it is most recent race. Interestingly enough, for a horse who had been a closer all along, one of the things I liked about Catching Freedom going into the Derby was I thought he would be more forwardly placed, and I think his fractions are indicative of that. Those are, he was more forwardly placed in the Derby, albeit still fairly well back, probably about mid pack or rear of mid pack, but he's more forwardly placed, and that. I think in order to be competitive in the Preakness, he's going to have to take another step forward, meaning he's going to have to be even closer to the pace. So looking at these numbers, that might very well be possible for him to be competitive in that regard, but I'm not overly certain. So those are not the fractions we had been used to seeing from Catching Freedom, who had been a closer up to this point. Their average and sustained pace are a little bit below average. He's expending his energy about the way a pace presser should, so that's positive. And his projected final time is pretty good, and it's one of the better ones. And I think he's more maintaining good form at this point, and as opposed to building on it and running a better race. But his current form, I think, is very competitive here. I have some questions about the race shape for Catching Freedom. I really like this horse, but I just wonder about that. It's certainly a positive that Brad Cox is putting him in this race because he doesn't normally do that. And so for progression, we'll add a point and give him a plus 0.33. So he's right at about average in terms of the pace fractions. So now we come to Mystic Dan, our Derby winner, and we'll use the Derby and we'll see where the race was run. I think was won for Mystic Dan was at that second fraction, that he was able to maintain a pretty high level of speed. You see his third fraction, which wasn't a surprise to me at all, is drops off a fair amount, and because he looked like, as we know, he was just begging for the wire and had enough to hang in there, give him credit, but I think he saved a ton of ground on the rail. We all know that. And I thought he got a dream trip on the rail. And consequently, he was able to save the ground, which is what it's all about, and get the job done. I'm not sure that scenario will exist here. And if it does, even being on the rail, I don't know. I think certainly the cutback in distance will help Mystic Dan's cause. I just wonder about a horse who I don't know that he really wants 2 turns. Is still staying in a place where he's not overly comfortable or is not totally within his wheelhouse. So I worry about that a little bit when it comes to Mystic Dan. However, speed-wise, he definitely is a fit here, and he is faster than quite a few in here. So who knows? Lightning could strike twice. I'm betting against it, but I think I can definitely see using him in the exotics based upon these numbers. The third fraction is admittedly a little troubling, but this is a little shorter distance, so he might be able to carry his speed a little farther, and then that gives him a chance. He's expending his energy right in range with a horse who runs about mid-pack like he does, and you see his projected time is pretty good. I'm giving him a -1 because of the concerns I just stated, but Mystic Dan I could certainly see using in this spot. I really don't like him at the price you're probably going to get. But if we just want to cash tickets, then he's the horse you probably want to use underneath in the exotics. Not sure about as a win candidate. Don't have the total score there, and I apologize. That's my fault. But we will certainly see it at the end when we put them all together. Seize the Gray is our Pat Day Mile winner. And again, 1 turn. So what we've done for pace is use the Jeff Ruby Stakes. And the reason being it's a 2-turn race where Seize the Gray had a favorable outcome and ran a pretty good race, albeit on synthetic. That's why we have the asterisk there. So we want to qualify it. But the idea was to get a 2-turn effort that might be representative of the kind of race that Seize the Gray could run in the Preakness. That's why we're doing it. Now, you do see with the synthetic, the fractions are a little slower on the front end and a little quicker on the back end. So it's not a surprise to find a third fraction that's above average. Same thing with average and sustained pace. They're a little bit above average. He does expend energy just the way one should with his running style, so he's an efficient runner. The projected time is pretty damn good, but you have to recall it is based upon synthetic numbers. So he gets a very good pace score of, we're going to give him a +1. I'm not overly certain that he's got to move forward in him, but he looks to be in pretty good form, and mainly he hasn't run as much as Just Steel has. So I'm kind of thinking maybe, and plus he just ran at a 1-turn mile. Maybe that'll give him a little more in the tank. I don't know. He just looks like a horse that the coach is throwing in here, and I just kind of like his chances a little bit more. Of the 2 Lucas horses, I like Seize the Gray, so I'm going to give him a +1 for that. Just Steel is another one that we certainly couldn't use the Derby as a race because obviously he did not run very well, and I don't think it's indicative of how well this horse can run. So what we did was we went back to use the Arkansas Derby. It is the best race that Just Steel has run, and he does have that zigzag pattern where he is slated to run a good race. I'm worried that he's run too much this year, and it may have caught up with him in the Kentucky Derby, but he also could rebound from it the way he's been doing with a good race. So this would be representative if, best case scenario, Just Steel runs back to that Arkansas Derby. So you see his third fraction was excellent. It's above average. The average pace a little bit below, and the sustained pace a little bit above. He expends energy very efficiently, which I thought was nice to see. So that may, if he can continue to manage his speed in that fashion, that would certainly give him a better chance than some others. Certainly that projected time is, if he can, he runs back to the Arkansas Derby, he's got a chance to win the Preakness. I'm just not that confident that he will be in tip-top form, which he has proven to be just a hair below the very best here. There's not necessarily the very best of the 3-year-old crop in this race. So to me, it's more just a matter of, I just think this horse needs some time off. That's really what it is. But there are some, I can go either way with Just Steel. That's ultimately what this should be telling us. And So if you like just steel, you have some positives for sure, but there are some negatives as well. We look at Tuscan Gold. We lost on the Louisiana Derby, the Chad Brown trainee. And if you look at these Louisiana Derby numbers, you got to be psyched. Number one, because it's run at the same distance as the Preakness. Number two, his final fraction was very good in comparison to the rest of the field. And you see his average and sustained pace was a little bit above average. His percentage energy is what I really thought was excellent. He just manages his speed extremely well for a horse who was running about mid-pack in this race. I am expecting that he will be more forwardly placed. And just the fact that he could finish third running that efficiently, maybe he won't be quite as efficient if he has to run up near the leaders a little early, but it should tell us he probably is going to have something in the tank left. Moreover, because he's a Chad Brown, I think he's going to run a big one here, and that's why he gets +2. So we look at his projected time for the Preakness, it's one of the better ones. And so consequently, you look at all these numbers, and to me, I think Tuscan Gold looks awful good in the Preakness. So finally, we come with the other Baffert, who is now the Baffert, Imagination. And we're going to use the Santa Anita Derby. And he has the running lines of the fractions of a horse who likes to run up on the lead. You see the descending, finishing with a 50.93, which isn't bad in comparison to the rest of the field. He's expending his energy about the same level as an early pace presser at 51.64. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. And I think he's right along. He's pretty much right in line with the average for this field. Now, to me, the plus to Imagination is being a Baffert. I think this one's ready to take another move forward. He has the kind of a pattern that tells you that he just might do that. It's been between the years with this horse. He's had a lot of maturity issues, kind of like Fort Bragg last year. He reminds me of. And, that horse, you never denied the talent. It was just when can he put it all together. And about this time last year, if you recall the Pat Day Mile, Fort Bragg ran a really big race. So not to say that this is a different year, obviously, but it's just it's comparable. I don't like seeing a lot of seconds from a Bob Baffert horse. That's a little concerning. But again, this one seems to be a slow developing horse, and maybe he's getting it at just the right time. I think you look at these fractions, it's pretty certain to me he's going to be on the lead. And he could be dangerous there, particularly if he's ready to run a big one. So Imagination is a horse, certainly from the pace numbers, I think is one that you could that you can consider. And if the price is right, I mean, maybe you can. I think you can definitely use them, and possibly even to win. So here are our pace numbers all together, and you see early pace, average pace, sustained pace for each contender, their final fraction 3FR, the percentage energy that they've expended up until the 6 furlong mark. And then finally, their score as we arrive at taking the final fraction, average and sustained pace, and comparing it against the average of the entire field, and then with our plus and minus progression subjective number, if in fact we decide to assign one. So looking at these, as we mentioned in the past, excuse me, for the Kentucky Derby, usually a horse who leads in the average and sustained pace categories wins the Kentucky Derby. And so if you think of it from those perspectives, from that qualification, Tuscan Gold has to look pretty good. And that's one of the reasons I like him. His pace numbers set up really well, in particular the fact that he manages his speed so well with a low percentage energy. He leads in overall score, and so I think he looks pretty good. Seize the Gray is certainly qualified a little bit because it was coming from synthetic, but I do think it shows numbers of a horse who does fit here. We just do have to remember he's coming from a one-turn race, and this is 2 turns. Just Steele, if he runs back to that Arkansas Derby, that would put him in the mix. We just have some reservations as to whether or not that's going to happen. Mystic Dan, you do see that third fraction is one of the lower ones in comparison to the rest of the field. But he does have the speed to stick around, and I have some reservations about Lightning striking twice, but and the price is going to be awful short. But I think he's certainly one that he runs at about the average of the group. So, and this isn't the Derby was certainly a deeper field, so he's one I think you can think about and consider for sure if you like him. This I don't know that this would dissuade you too terribly much. Little troubling that third fraction's a little light. That's all I'll say. Catching Freedom is I was a little disappointed to see his pace fractions the way they are, but I'm a little concerned that he's going to have to be a little too forwardly placed in this race. But I think he's in good form, and I expect him to maintain it. And I think he'll be competitive here. I just have some questions about the race shape. And as you can see, the closers are really the big losers here. They just don't seem to stack up well at all. And I don't think they're going to have the race shape that's favorable to them. Mugatu in particular was very troubling. That 52.78 is just really high for a closer. And to me, again, it's a horse that's working hard to keep up. And Uncle Heavy, I think, may fall into that same type of category. So as far as finding some value goes, Seize the Gray might be an interesting value play. But, I without Moose in there to point to, this all of a sudden becomes a pretty wide open race, I think. And but from the pace perspective, and again, we have to consider all 4 aspects. But right now, from a pace perspective, to me, Tuscan Gold looks pretty good.